Imagine, you take a step, and a void opens up beneath you. You fall. Darkness. Cold. Walls of ice close in around you. You scream, but up above, the wind howls and your voice is lost in the blizzard. No one will come. This is how people die in the crevasses of Elbrus, and, most likely, this is exactly what happened to Ekaterina Klimovskaya. This story took place in the fall of 2020, a story about how an experienced mountaineer set out on her 8th ascent of Elbrus and never returned. Let's find out what happened and who is responsible. Let's start with some background. Ekaterina Klimovskaya from St. Petersburg was 30 years old. She was far from a novice in the mountains. She already had 7 successful ascents of Elbrus under her belt. She had missed the previous year due to pregnancy, but now that her daughter was a little older, the baby was only 6 months old at the time, Ekaterina decided to return to the mountains. An 8th ascent. It would seem like routine for someone with her experience, but it wasn't. The classic southern route no longer appealed to her. She knew it too well, had walked it too many times. Every turn, every landmark, she had seen it all so many times she could have done it with her eyes closed. So the choice fell to the northern slope. And that is a completely different story. The route is significantly more difficult, both technically and physically. There is no well-trodden path here, no crowds of tourists, no feeling that you're just out for a walk. The northern slope is true mountaineering. Additionally, she was going in October, and October on Elbrus is already the end of the season. The sky can cloud over at any moment. The wind sweeps in without warning. The temperature fluctuates so much that in the morning you might be walking in a single fleece, and by lunch you can't feel your fingers even in gloves. There are no snowcats on the northern slope, those tracked vehicles that, on the south side, take tourists almost to the Pastakov rocks for 1,000 rubles. The infrastructure people are used to on the southern route doesn't exist here. The ascent itself takes much longer, and most importantly, during the off-season, there is no rescue team on duty on the mountain. In other words, this was meant to be a real ascent, without a safety net, without conveniences, without room for serious error. Ekaterina purchased a tour through a company called Adventure Club. Later, representatives of this firm would claim they were merely intermediaries, connecting clients with guides, and that's all. We have nothing to do with it, we're just a platform, they would say. Whatever the case, Ekaterina paid 7,000 rubles to the club and was supposed to give another 21,500 directly to the guide, Litvinov. As a result, she found herself in a group of 18 commercial tourists, 18 people who were going to summit Elbrus from the north side, and, this is important, most of the participants had no experience with such difficult ascents. Some had been to the mountains, yes, some had even climbed easier peaks, but the northern slope of Elbrus in October is not the place to go for your first serious experience. The group was led by a guide, Dmitry Litvinov, from Krasnodar. On the company's website, he was described glowingly. 41 years old, a caring and strict instructor with a good sense of humor. Education, the history department of Kuban State University. He had traveled in the Caucasus, the Himalayas, the Altai, the Pamirs, the Fawn Mountains, the Alps, and Yosemite Park. Dozens of successful ascents of Elbrus, both independently and as an instructor. In 2013, he received an avalanche certification. It sounds impressive. It inspires confidence. Working with Litvinov were 2 others, guide Alexei Puzikov and Ivan Lopatin, one of the founders of the Adventure Club. 3 people for 18 clients. Already at this stage, something doesn't add up. But here is what was discovered later, during the criminal investigation. 2 of the 3 guides did not have the necessary qualifications. Neither Litvinov nor Puzikov were certified mountaineering or mountain tourism instructors.
They had not undergone professional training in this field, and they also had no experience guiding large groups. So on paper, dozens of ascents, the Himalayas, the Alps, but in reality, a lack of basic qualifications. So what do we have? 18 clients, 3 guides.
To understand the scale of the problem, even during peak season on the southern slope of Elbrus, where everything is developed and relatively safe, the standard is a maximum of 3 participants per guide. But here it was October. A northern route, Category 2A. Participants with vastly different levels of preparation. Some were in good shape, some had overestimated their abilities. Some were at such an altitude for the first time. Under such conditions, there should be no more than 2 people per guide. This isn't a whim, it's a matter of survival. But apparently, they decided it would be fine. The clients had paid, the route was approved. Why wait? On October 12, 2020, Ekaterina made her last appearance on social media. She posted a few photos, mountains, snow, anticipation. She reposted an advertisement for that same mountaineering company. They were giving away a free ascent of Elbrus. A telling detail if you think about it. Commercial outfits are willing to take literally anyone on such routes. Won the lottery? Welcome to the northern slope. 6 days later, on October 18th, at 11 o'clock at night, the group left the northern shelter. Altitude 3,800 meters.
The summit push began. Usually they start later, at 2 or 3 in the morning. The calculation is simple. You need to be at the summit no later than 1 in the afternoon to have time to descend before dark. But this group started earlier, most likely due to the participants' lack of preparation. The guide factored in extra time for a slow pace. There is another theory. The forecast predicted deteriorating weather by midday, and they were hoping to slip through a weather window, to get up and down before it started. Night. Darkness. The beams of headlamps snatch only a few meters of the slope ahead from the blackness. Snow crunches under crampons. Breath escapes as steam and is immediately carried away by the wind. 18 people stretch out in a line, moving up the slope. One participant backed out of the ascent before they even started and stayed at the camp, a wise decision as it would turn out. Another woman left the route near the lens rocks. She had developed altitude sickness, dizziness, nausea, weakness in her legs. At this altitude, it's no joke. She needed to descend immediately. The guide, Ivan Lopatin, went with her, and now the arithmetic becomes very grim.
For 16 people, there were only 2 guides left. At the lower lens rocks, at an altitude of about 4,600 meters, the group stopped. Here, they made a decision that would later be scrutinized in court, to leave their ropes and some of their gear behind. The logic was that the main crevices are located lower down, at an altitude of 3,950 to 4,200 meters. They had already passed that section, so they could lighten their load and proceed with less weight. They did take 1 spare rope, just in case. Just 1. And then, as often happens in such stories, the weather decided to show who was boss. A cloud enveloped the mountain. Not a light mist, a dense gray veil in which you could see nothing. Visibility dropped to a few meters. Landmarks disappeared. The slope ahead, the slope behind, everything was uniformly white, uniformly featureless. Despite this, despite the lack of landmarks near the summit, the guide continued to lead the group upward. Maybe he hoped the cloud would dissipate. Maybe he didn't want to disappoint the clients who had paid money and were counting on the summit. Maybe he simply failed to appreciate the scale of the danger. The morning of October 19 arrived. The sky did not clear. The situation only grew worse. Wind was added to the poor visibility. Not just wind, a squall. Gusts so strong they could knock you off your feet. Snow flew horizontally, lashing faces, getting under hoods. Every step was a struggle.
every breath and effort. Litvinov finally made the right decision to turn around and begin the descent. They were only some 150 meters from the summit, less than the distance from an apartment building entrance to the nearest store, but to continue was too dangerous. The mountain does not forgive stubbornness. The group turned back. Litvinov went first, breaking the trail. Puzikov was at the rear of the column, picking up stragglers. Radios and phones weren't working because of the storm. The signal was jammed. Communication was lost. 16 people and 2 guides, with no way to communicate with each other. Only voices, which were drowned out by the roar of the wind. And somewhere on the descent, Litvinov lost the route. In such visibility, it's not hard to do. One wrong turn, and you're already going the wrong way. The group deviated to the east and walked straight into a vast area of crevices.
Crevasses on a glacier are not something you can see from a distance. They are covered by snow. On top is a smooth white surface, and beneath it, a void. Dozens of meters of emptiness. You take a step, and the snow bridge beneath you collapses. You don't even have time to realize what has happened. In such conditions, one is supposed to travel roped together. It's a basic rule. 3 or 4 people are tied together with one rope. If one falls through, the others hold them. In zero visibility, a person can fall or disappear into a crevasse, and the others might not even notice. They simply vanish, and that's it. But there was almost nothing to rope up with. The ropes had been left below at the lens rocks. They wanted to travel light. They saved energy. They saved time. They didn't save a life. In such a situation, it would be logical to at least form the group into a tight column, a distance of 1.5 meters. Each person can see the back of the one in front. If someone falls, they will notice immediately and help immediately. It's not an ideal solution, but it's something. But according to the recollections of one participant, the guide set too fast a pace.
He wanted to get the group out of the danger zone faster. That's understandable. But as a result, he began to get far ahead. Those who were in good shape followed him, and the rest fell behind. The group stretched out over the slope for dozens of meters. In the whiteout, these meters became a chasm. You can't see those in front. You can't see those behind. You are alone. No one was really keeping an eye on the stragglers anymore. In effect, everyone was walking on their own. The guide and the strong participants were rushing toward the camp where it was warm, where it was safe. The weakened ones dragged themselves along behind, exhausted with every step, hoping, apparently, that the rear guide, Puzikov, would pick them up. Ekaterina Klimovskaya found herself among the stragglers. On the descent, she began to feel ill. It seems altitude sickness had hit her. It's a treacherous thing. You can feel fine on the ascent, but on the way down, when your body is already exhausted, it hits with full force. Headache, nausea, your legs feel like cotton, your thoughts get confused. Every movement requires an effort of will. She was walking last, next to the guide, Alexei Puzikov. He was watching over the stragglers. That was his job. When they had descended to about 4,900 meters, they heard a voice through the howling wind. Faint, barely audible. They moved toward the sound. Soon they found another participant, Grigory. He had also fallen ill. He had fallen behind the main group, lost sight of those ahead, and gotten lost. He was standing in the middle of the white emptiness, not knowing where to go. Now there were 3 of them, Ekaterina, Grigory, and the guide, Puzikov. 3 exhausted people in the middle of a crevice-ridden glacier. Ekaterina and Grigory were barely moving. Their strength was gone. And walking against a squall is a separate ordeal. The wind pushes you back. The wind forces the air from your lungs. The wind steals your last warmth. You lean forward, almost lying on it, and still you can barely crawl. It was starting to get dark. October days are short, the sun sets quickly, and darkness falls almost instantly. Half an hour ago you could see something, and now nothing. The guide Puzikov reasoned soundly. Descending in the dark, in this weather, with 2 exhausted people, through a crevice field without a rope, was certain death.
The chance of falling into a crevasse increases many times over. The chance of getting lost even more so. He decided to spend the night on the mountain. It sounds almost mundane to spend the night, but you need to understand what that means in practice. Such ascents usually take 12 to 15 hours. Climbers don't carry much gear with them. It's extra weight, which becomes torture at high altitude. The standard kit: a thermos of tea, a snack, a spare down jacket. They don't take tents, sleeping bags, or stoves. Why would they? By evening, you're supposed to be back at camp. So what awaited them was a so-called cold bivouac, without shelter, without heat, without any way to get warm. They found a crevice in the rocks, a small hollow where the wind wasn't blowing as hard. The wind still found them, but at least it wasn't hitting them with full force. They put on all the warm clothes they had, down jackets, spare hats, everything they could find in their backpacks. They huddled together, 3 people in a ball, trying to preserve what little warmth they had left, and they began to wait for dawn. In October, at this altitude, the temperature easily drops to -15°C.
And with the wind chill, it feels like -30, if not worse. The wind is the main enemy. It draws heat from the body faster than you can produce it. You shiver, then you stop shivering, and that's a bad sign. It means your body is starting to give up. The night dragged on endlessly. Every hour felt like 3. Sleep is impossible. The cold won't let you drift off. Only a half delirium where consciousness floats and the body continues to shake. Sometimes one of the 3 would stir, changing position, and this would pull the others from their stupor. They spoke to each other in short phrases through chattering teeth, just to make sure everyone was still alive. But against all odds, they held on until morning, when the gray gloom began to lighten, when it became possible to make out the outlines of the slope. They knew they had survived. For now, they had survived. At dawn, they continued their descent. However, the night had taken its toll. Grigori could barely walk. He had severely frostbitten his feet during the night. His toes were numb, had lost all feeling. Every step brought pain, and at the same time a strange sensation of walking on feet that weren't his own.
His overall condition was poor. Sluggishness, confused thoughts. His body craved warmth and rest, but instead, the slope again, the wind again, the struggle again. Ekaterina was also barely holding on. The bivouac had drained her of her last strength. She was moving on autopilot, barely aware of what was happening. A step, another step. Don't fall. Don't stop. Alexei Puzikov had to get 2 exhausted people down, alone, without a rope, across a glacier with crevasses. At first, they tried to support Grigori together, Alexei on one side, Katya on the other. But on narrow sections, this was awkward. They couldn't walk 3 abreast. The guide took the young man himself and went ahead, practically dragging him, and Katya moved along behind them. Perhaps Puzikov reasoned, this is her 8th ascent of Elbrus. She knows this mountain. She has enough experience. She'll manage on her own. But Grigori needed to be literally carried, otherwise he wouldn't make it. The logic is understandable, but in the mountains, logic doesn't always work. When they had descended to an altitude of about 4,100 meters, the guide stopped and showed Ekaterina the direction. Over there is the camp.
They were already very close. A little further and this nightmare would be over. Warmth, food, rest. He noticed that Katya was walking normally, even taking pictures. She took out her phone, snapped a few shots. The mountains, the slope, maybe herself. Puzikov probably thought, if she's taking photos, she must be okay. A person on the edge doesn't behave like that. And he turned his attention back to Grigori. The young man was hanging on him like a dead weight. His legs were barely obeying him. It wasn't far to the camp, but those meters still had to be covered. A few minutes passed, maybe 5,
maybe 10. The guide turned around. The woman was not on the slope, simply gone. A white slope, a gray sky, the whistle of the wind, and no one. Puzikov thought she had fallen. He walked a few meters back up, following her tracks, clear prints from her crampons in the snow. The tracks led, and then stopped. They didn't gradually fade away. They abruptly ended, as if the person had simply vanished. He called for her, shouted. The wind carried his voice away. No one answered. Properly, he should have followed the tracks further, to look for the place where she fell, to look for the crevasse she might have fallen into. But that would have meant abandoning Grigori, and he could barely stand on his own feet. To leave him alone on the slope would be to condemn him to death. 2 people, 1 guide. An impossible choice. Apparently, Puzikov convinced himself that Katya had passed them, that she had descended to the camp by another route, that she was already sitting in the warmth, drinking tea and waiting for them. He dragged Grigori down. And what was happening with the main group? According to one of the participants, they also got very lost on the way down. They would go right, then left, losing their direction. They would find the trail with difficulty and then lose it again. One of the climbers fell into a crevasse. Not deep. He got stuck, catching himself on the edges, but he couldn't get out on his own. Litvinov ran down to the camp to get the 3rd guide, Lopatin, the one who had taken the woman down from the lens rocks that morning. The 2 of them were supposed to pull the man out. But by the time he ran down and came back, the participant had managed on his own. He kicked steps in the snow, pulled himself up, and climbed out. He got lucky. By 7 in the evening, the main part of the group reached the northern shelter. Exhausted, frozen, but alive. They stumbled into the warmth and collapsed onto the bunks. Some fell asleep immediately. Some couldn't get warm for several hours. They sat wrapped in everything they could find, shaking. They waited late into the night for the trio that had fallen behind. Puzikov, Grigoriev, Ekaterina. They should have arrived. They didn't. Around 2 in the morning, Litvinov called the emergency services. He reported that 3 people were missing on the slope. On October 20th, at 5 in the morning, as the sky was just starting to lighten, Litvinov and the 3 most prepared participants went out to search. They climbed the slope, peering into every shadow, at every mound in the snow. Soon they met Puzikov. He was walking down, if you could call it walking. He was literally carrying Grigoriev. The young man was hanging on him, moving his legs purely mechanically. His frostbitten feet could barely feel anything. And Katya? They asked Puzikov. He didn't answer, or he mumbled something unintelligible. He himself was on the verge of collapse. The climbers went higher, following the tracks. They shouted. They called for Yekaterina. Their voices carried across the slope and were lost in the emptiness. No one responded. The weather worsened again. The wind picked up to 15 meters per second. A dense cloud descended, the same whiteout as the day before. It became impossible to continue the search. By evening, the group returned to camp. Yekaterina was not found. The MCHS rescuers arrived only on October 21. A reminder of the timeline, the ascent began on the 18th. Yekaterina disappeared on the morning of the 19th. More than a day had passed. A woman who could not be found on the slope had, with high probability, fallen into an ice crevasse. These crevasses are veritable traps. They're covered with a layer of snow. They look like a flat surface, indistinguishable from a safe slope. But under the thin snow bridge is a void. Crevasses can go down for tens of meters, sometimes hundreds, deep into the glacier, into eternal darkness. Predicting where they are is practically impossible. A glacier is not rock. It moves, slowly, imperceptibly to the eye, but constantly. It flows down the slope like a thick river.
And in the process of this movement, new crevasses constantly open up. Where it was safe yesterday, there can be a pit today. That said, a person who falls into a crevasse can very well survive. The fall isn't always fatal. Sometimes the crevasse narrows toward the bottom and the body gets wedged. Sometimes there's a snow plug at the bottom that softens the impact. The person lies there, in the darkness, with broken legs maybe, or without serious injuries, simply trapped. They scream, but the walls of ice muffle the sound. Above, wind, a blizzard, the voice can't get through. They try to climb out, but the walls are slippery, smooth. Without a rope, without an ice axe, it's impossible. And they wait, hoping they will be found, that they will be heard, that a rope will be lowered. But time passes. The cold drains the last of their warmth. An exhausted body after a cold bivouac cannot fight for long. A few hours, maybe half a day. Then, it's over. And the rescuers arrived a day later. In essence, they came to look not for a living person, they came for a body. The specialists who arrived surveyed the slope. They used a helicopter. It circled over the glacier, looking for anything.
A spot of color, unusual for snow. A track. A hole. Nothing. Volunteers who participated in the search later said that in that area, the crevasses go to immense depths. They had to descend 40 or 50 meters, as far as their ropes would reach. Further down, darkness, the unknown. First, they would look at the edges of the crevasses, ice formations, icicles. If a person fell, they would have knocked them off. That would have been a sign. But there are places, the rescuers said, where you can't see anything at all. No edges, no walls, no bottom. You look down, and there's just a black void, an abyss. The body of Ekaterina Krymovskaya has not been found to this day. Somewhere there, in the depths of the glacier, she remains forever. The mountain took her and did not give her back. So what was the cause of this tragedy? Who is to blame? The famous mountaineer Vladimir Shatayev, husband of Elvira Shatayevai, who died on Lenin Peak, put it this way. When the weather is good, people climb Elbrus practically in a t-shirt. This makes them complacent. It seems like, what's the big deal? It's just a walk. Now they actively use snowcats.
They chip in 1,000 rubles each and get dropped off almost at the Pastakov rocks. But there's no acclimatization with that. There have been cases. A person gets off the snowcat, walks 10 meters, and collapses. Heart attack. Death. On flat ground in good weather. The body simply isn't ready for the altitude. That's why I'm against these snowcats. You need proper acclimatization, 7 to 8 days minimum. If you're going to the mountains, get proper training. It's not enough to have modern gear. You need to know how to use it. You need a technical foundation. Because of bad weather or poor visibility, people get off route, fall into crevasses, freeze to death. The standard worldwide is a maximum of 2 clients per guide, 1 rope team. But here, tour companies often offer people without status or experience as guides. A guy climbs Elbrus a couple of times and already considers himself a guide. You see ads like Elbrus in 1 day, and they pack those groups with crowds of people. Shatayev added, yes, there are experienced guides on Elbrus, true professionals, but they won't lead a rabble of 18 people. They'll take 1, maybe 2 clients. That's it.
And you'll have to pay them completely different money. There, essentially, is the answer. The main cause of this tragedy was a catastrophic shortage of guides. There simply weren't enough of them physically to control such a large group. Especially when problems began, when the weather turned, when people started to get exhausted, when everyone needed attention. 3 people for 18 clients, and then 2 for 16, and then 1 for 2 people, and he couldn't save them both. Of course, there are other factors. The group should have been turned around much earlier, as soon as the cloud descended. Leaving the ropes below was a decision that seemed reasonable, but proved fatal. To walk in bad weather without being roped together on a glacier riddled with crevasses, that isn't a risk, it's Russian roulette. On ascents like this, every participant must carry safety equipment, carabiners, ropes, ice axes. On a covered glacier, you must move only in rope teams, on the ascent, on the descent, and even on flat sections. Because crevasses can be covered with snow, the danger is not visible, it is simply waiting. A leader is obligated to see all members of the group.
To know their condition, not to abandon them or get ahead, leaving exhausted people behind. And, of course, the rescuers. Arriving a day later is a death sentence. Had they arrived earlier, even by a few hours, they would have been searching for a living person, someone who still had a chance. Instead, they flew in for a body, one they didn't even find. Looking at the bigger picture, this case is not an exception. It's very similar to the 2021 tragedy on the same Elbrus when 5 people died. The same picture, commercial companies that want to maximize their earnings. More clients means more money. A shortage of guides without proper qualifications. Clients who look for the cheapest option, who lack sufficient experience but still set out on difficult routes. And such cases are far from isolated. In 2011, the tourist newspaper Volny Viter published an article by a certain Yulia S. She told how instructors from the adventure club abandoned her on the slope during an ascent of Elbrus. According to her, the group members were effectively left to fend for themselves. The guides couldn't handle so many people, they simply couldn't keep up. Yulia fell ill. She was lying in the snow. She could barely move. She couldn't see her own instructors. They were somewhere ahead or behind, but certainly not nearby. In the end, people from a completely different group helped her down. Strangers, who simply saw a person in trouble and didn't walk past. One of the instructors from that trip, Andrei Dukhin, later claimed that the woman had made many inaccuracies in her story. According to him, it is normal practice in the mountains for people from different groups to help each other. He himself did not help Yulia because she was not the last one in the column. He was accompanying other participants. If Yulia hadn't found some kind people, he said, she would have ended up in the company of our rearguard, including me. It sounds almost like an excuse, as if they wouldn't have abandoned her anyway. But the fact remains, strangers helped her. In 2017, the media wrote about Mikhail Belikov. He fell not far from the summit of Elbrus and suffered a serious injury. The guide he was with, according to witnesses, continued the ascent with part of the group, despite the emergency. The summit was more important. One story after another. Different years, different people, but the same picture. But let's return to Yekaterina Klimovskaya. How did this case end? The organizer and the 2 guides received real prison sentences, not suspended, real. All 3 were sent to a general regime correctional colony. Ivan Lopatin, as a guide and co-founder of the Adventure Club, received 3 years. Dmitry Litvinov, 2 years and 5 months. Alexei Puzikov, 2 years and 4 months. Each was also fined 100,000 rubles. In addition, they were ordered to pay compensation for moral damages to Yekaterina's mother. All 3 were taken into custody right in the courtroom. This is a rarity for such cases. Usually it's suspended sentences, fines, and everyone goes home. But here, actual imprisonment. Maybe this will change the situation, at least a little. Maybe other commercial companies will think twice before packing their groups to capacity and saving money on guides. Although, most likely, they won't. Money is more important. On Yekaterina Klimovskaya's social media page, a post remains. She wrote, "Sometimes it's worth turning this world upside down." Not for the sake of big changes or an ecstatic view from the soul,
but just for the hell of it. To wake up in your own bed, take a shower, and then go and conquer Everest. And on its summit, dance a mad tango with all the winds, laughing into the abyss of the sky. She wanted to conquer summits, to dance with the winds, to laugh into the abyss of the sky. The abyss took her. Her Katerina left behind a 6-month-old daughter, a little girl who will never know her mother, who will one day be told this story about the mountains, about the crevasse, about how her mother went away and never came back.